Hi guys, Ben here. Another podcast from me, 100 Ironman, covering some details and some topics on my journey to an Ironman. So today I've just come from a meeting with a friend of mine, and we've been talking about, and I think it's quite a topical subject, one that I was going to cover anyway, but being self-critical. So understanding self, spending time with self, being aware that we are more than what we see and have, and the materialistic life that we have on the outside. And I think it's quite obvious how that is reflected internally and how it actually has a mass effect on sport, on the way that you feel about yourself and how you're able to perform. As I've said before, if you're constantly thinking about external factors and things that are potentially outside of your control, you're never going to be able to squeeze in the training session that you would have if you were, or you had a clear mind. And we were talking about utilizing just 5 to 10 minutes per day to reflect, think about self internally, what's going on, because your ability to be truthful, and when I mean truthful, I mean completely honest with yourself in all aspects, not just the physical, but the mindful as well. As soon as you open yourself up and start to become mindfully honest with yourself, you start to make some choices in the whole of your life that will not only better yourself, but also support that legacy, that mindful vision that you have of yourself, and believe the person that you can be. Because we all face difficulties, we all face aspects of our life that haven't worked out particularly well, and we at times can hold on to those aspects. But when we start to think in the present, start to be critical of ourselves and honest with ourselves about how life, or what life is showing, there seems to be a number of different things that are presented. You know, if we talk about the weight loss industry, for example, if the 60+% of Americans that are obese at the moment were honest with themselves, then we would see a dramatic shift over the next coming 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and the years beyond. You know, obesity and the epidemic would no longer be an issue. And when you start to be honest with yourself and truthful to yourself, and address those issues that you've been hiding or not dealing with, then you begin to adapt freely to the outside world and evolve, learn and sculpt a life that actually has little concern or issue. You know, I'm a great believer that we've become completely clouded by all of the issues happening externally, that sometimes the most obvious ones, the ones that the body is telling us, are ignored, forgotten, or put to the side. Illness is a prime example of that. You know, it has its way of showing us, but only a select few actually identify it as a way that the body is trying to explain to you what the problem is. You know, my IT band, for example, was one that I mentioned in a previous podcast. And being honest with yourself can be one of those hardest things to learn, if not the hardest thing. I meet many people in my everyday life that appear to find comfort in being the victim, find comfort in having issues, in having a lesser than normal or acceptable life. And they find that acceptable to bond within that realm. But for me, I think the second you start to observe what's happening inside, your vision of the world, the external world, seems to change dramatically. As I've said before, I use meditation on a daily basis, 5 to 10 minutes. Within that time, I just reflect within the present. I allow myself and give myself permission just to forget about all of the other aspects that are happening in the world. Time for self. You know, the more that you're honest with yourself, your abilities, the skills, the more you're honest about how far you have to go, to achieve those aspirations and goals, the more you'll achieve. Following the plan of life really starts internally. And I've said before, we become so distracted in the outside world, in having, that we forget that internal world. The internal world is how we represent the outside world. In sport especially, this is absolute. If every athlete was to start thinking about the areas in which they were to improve, or being honest with their weaknesses, then I think as a whole, the whole industry would see a much greater advancement than trying to fix the outside. And we see it every day in gyms. People smashing out the sessions, still being unable to lose weight, still with a body in which they own, they have control over, yet there's no progression. If you were to dig deep within that individual's lifestyle, I'm sure we'd find one key element that they're not particularly honest about. I'd say the majority is to do with their diet, to do with the bad eating choices that they're having. So today it's about internal reflection. It's about thinking about what you're doing, taking ownership over you, avoiding spending so much effort worrying about what the competitors are doing, what their training plan looks like. Looking internal for the answers about development improvement, about sculpting yourself internally first. And reflection doesn't take long. And what I often find is, after just a few minutes meditating, the rest of the day seems to go to plan. I seem to have a clearer mind, and my productivity levels go through the roof. And when you start to think about it, why wouldn't you want to be the best that you could be? Why would you not want to be the best that you could be? It just makes sense. Being anything less than honest with yourself doesn't seem the right thing to be doing. Yet people do it on a regular and daily basis. For me, on my journey, I've experienced many, many different aspects that in the past I probably would have allowed my ego to get in the way. Where people would have asked, how's your training session going? And through the fear of judgment, said, okay, fine. In being honest internally and allowing the outside world to see that honesty, you actually open yourself up to help, advice, guidance, friendships and communities. Lie to yourself, you're lying to the rest of the world. Honesty starts within. So that's it for this episode. I just wanted to cover that, not a particularly long or exciting topic, but I thought it was important, and it came from the meeting that I had, the conversation I had today, about just being honest, and how life seems to give so much more when you're not hiding behind a character, a facade. You're honest about that true person that is inside, and you allow that honesty to project outside. And of course, there's going to be a period of change. Some people may like it, some not. It may highlight areas of other people's lives whereby maybe they're not being honest with themselves. In November last year, I weighed 10 kilos more. And as a percentage, that's quite a significant amount for me to lose. I was still fitter than, I would say, 90% of the population. If I was completely honest with myself at that time, looking at myself in the mirror, I knew that I could be so much more. I knew that my physical performance could be improved, would need to be improved. I knew that my diet at the time wasn't as clean or as suitable or supportive as it could have been. And after a reality check, a bit of self-critique, without being defensive in the approach or in the answers that highlighted itself, I was able to make some really positive changes. So, today, I'd encourage and invite you to do the same. Spend just a few moments, 5, 10 minutes, turning that awareness inwards and doing a quick body scan, a quick diagnosis or moment of reflection about what's not working and the areas that you're not being fully honest with yourself, or why you're not being honest with yourself. Perhaps think about ways in which you can change that. Perhaps you've been procrastinating for a long time about not doing through the fear of failure, feedback, judgment. And then think about how that might affect you, not just now, that avoidance in taking action, but in 5, 10, 15 or 20 years. Because that judgment would have passed, but you'll still be living within that lie. So that's it for now. Have a good day. Peace out. Be safe.